Okay, so for this lesson, we're going to look at desalination and then ways to really preserve water. So salinity is talking about salt in water. So desalination is removing salt from the water, and then we get fresh water. And a lot of places in the world are struggling for fresh water on coastlines. And in the Middle East, areas have been booming with population, so they need a lot of fresh water as well. This is one of the main ways in which they get it. There's two ways. One is called distillation, and one is called reverse osmosis. So distillation, if we look right here, all we're really doing is heating that water. That produces steam. The salt is going to stay down here. So the salt stays, and then your fresh water comes out, and that's the way in which you get that fresh water. Now that's high heat and very energy intensive. Both of these use a ton of energy, but that's the first way. That's kind of like the old school way, that distillation. And then we have reverse osmosis, and really it's just a set of very, very tiny hold membranes, and we force water through there. So osmosis is the movement of water from high concentration to low concentration. With reverse osmosis, really what we're doing is we're forcing that water through those membranes, or they call it microfiltration sometimes. And really that's the basis behind reverse osmosis. There's a lot of energy that goes into it. We take seawater, which is here, we feed that through a system that kind of gets a little bit of the impurities out in a settling tank sometimes. And then they force that water through, the salt stays, the water goes through, and then we have that fresh water that then can go out to communities. There are a couple problems with it. As I said, it's very, very expensive here. We also have increased salinity because when you, let's go back really fast, after you get the fresh water, or we turn it into fresh water, we have a ton of salt, right? And that salt, let's say we have a ton of salt here, right? We don't have much to do with that. So what do? We dump that back into the ocean or back into the bay area. And that's going to increase the salinity there. Fish species and other organisms cannot, or they get very, very strained with all of that salt that's in their community now, or ecosystem. They struggle to survive, and they either have to move or they die out. So a lot of people say, well, why don't they just use that salt for like table salt? Well, salt, there's so much salt in the world, and companies are using it already, that salt would be useless. It's not a very high profitable piece of material or merchandise there. So the third thing that it does is it will kill the organisms when it's pumped into the system as well. As that water is brought into the desalination plants, it can kill the organisms as well. Okay, I'm going to post this video to watch, which is a good one. Gives kind of an overview of how we've been using it, what technology has been increasing, and still the problems that we see with it. Okay, how is water being wasted really? Number one is its costs. You can ask your parents, what's the water bill like every month or every year? And they're probably going to say they don't know because it's so low that no one really pays attention to it. And that's due to subsidies. So water is so heavily subsidized, so everybody has the ability to get it and use it. And it kind of hurts us because if it doesn't cost a lot, people just waste it. Okay. Number two, leaks and evaporation. That's kind of obvious. We need to increase technology and tools to limit evaporation and try to shore up any leaks that are kind of happening. I mean, you can look in the high school alone. Some of the bathrooms, you have a dripping faucet. That's fresh water that's going down the drain, and it's obviously going to go back into the water system. But if you're talking about a place that has aquifers, well, that water that got pumped out of the ground now has to work its way back down into that aquifer to be used again. And then the third thing is that lack of efficiencies. And how can that be changed? We need to subsidize the improvement of these materials that we have and these setups that we have. Okay, like farming, we need to get them using drip irrigation. How do we do that? Well, we have to subsidize it because it's really expensive. Okay, so I got ahead of myself there with farmers. Really, We have to really educate them when and how they irrigate. So using drip irrigation. Also, we shouldn't be irrigating our land in the middle of the day when it's burning hot sun, where it's going to be sucking some of that water straight out of whatever you're using, a sprinkler system. So we want to maybe irrigate at night or in the early morning. Also, what they're growing, or is it native plants? Is it water thirsty plants like corn in areas where there's limited water? And then what kind of water are they using? Are they using aquifers that are going dry? Are they taking it from rivers? Are they trying to use rainwater that's being caught maybe on their land, or something that we call gray water, which we'll talk about in a few seconds. We also have industries. They have what are called open loop and closed loop systems. So if they're a closed loop system, that means the water pretty much just goes around and around and around and kind of does the same job and never really gets released out in the open. Here's another closed loop system. So water is a good coolant for engines or for motors. So when that water heats up, we just pump it underground. And as it's underground, we know that the temperature underground is going to be cooler than the water that's coming off of those engines or motors, and it will cool it naturally for it. Okay, and then that water will get kicked right back into the system. So we're not really wasting water. Old school ways was we took the water out of a lake or a pond or something like that. It got heated because it was transferring the heat off of a motor, and then we dumped that really hot water back into that environment. And that's what we call thermal pollution, and that's not good. That water system then changes, and the organisms living there struggle. So we're going to do a little activity, a little checklist that you guys are going to make for this activity. So I'm going to kind of skip it. And I want to just talk about reusing and storing water. So you have something that's called gray water. And this is inside of your house. This is any water that's used that doesn't have fecal matter in it is considered gray water. So laundry, stuff when you're washing dishes, even your bath, shower, tub, all of that is considered gray water. It may have a little bit of soap in it, and it may have a little bit of dirt in it, but it's not contaminated with viruses or bacteria or any other fecal matter, and we can actually use that and irrigate with it. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. Now, having a system set up for that is expensive and it's very rare, but it would greatly help an area with preserving water, because if you're pumping water out of the ground, even if you're getting city water, this is one more step of using that water before it gets back into the water cycle. Okay. We also have something called rain barrels. We can catch water that comes off of your roof, comes into these downspouts, and then you could set up one of these little nifty systems where you have hoses coming off of them, and you can water your lawn or flowers or a flower bed or something like that. Okay, and that's just water that would have went off the gutter and into the grass. You can actually catch that and move that somewhere else that may need it, rather than using it out of a hose. Okay, two more things is we're talking mostly about reducing runoff in areas and also recharging our aquifers. And one thing is called a rain garden. So here's a building here, okay, and it rains and the water comes off. And if this rain garden wasn't here, all of that water would just go straight into, well, here they're saying the Puget Sound. It would go onto the road. It would go down into the storm drains. What you have to think about is underground, you may have an aquifer. Okay, and this water, it takes a long time to get down there, but it can recharge that. Well, if this rain garden isn't here, the rain garden is here to slow down that water. So it stops it before it can continue on down into the stream or into the roadway and down into storm drains. It could stop it. It could slow that. It could actually slow erosion as well. And it will add into the infiltration of that water. Same thing here on a house. Okay, you can actually put in a rain garden that's going to slow that water movement, and you're going to have infiltration of that water downwards, and you won't really get that massive flooding that may be at, like, let's say the end of your property, if you, depending on how your property is set up. Okay, rain gardens are put in a lot of places. Actually, Mountain Lakes is thinking about putting in a couple, and sadly, with what's going on nowadays, we can't do that as the environmental club as well. but it will come in the future. Last thing is ways in which we can change our ground substance. So rather than putting in blacktop or concrete, you can actually put in these what we call permeable driveways or drivable grass. And it sets up a grid system. And even on this one, you can have grass that grows up between there. You can drive a car on it, but it allows for more infiltration of the water. So blacktop or concrete, all that water would just run right off. But with this, the water can work its way through, recharge aquifers, and obviously stop flooding at the end of a driveway or not tax the storm drain system. And this will greatly help the environment for sure. Okay, that's about it for chapter 17.